The royal family has always been a symbol of strength, tradition, and unwavering composure. For generations, they have stood before the world with practiced smiles and carefully measured words. But, on a quiet Tuesday afternoon in March, something unprecedented happened that would shake the very foundations of the monarchy. Princess Charlotte, the young royal who had captured hearts worldwide with her spirited personality and infectious laughter, stood before a gathering that would never forget what they witnessed. Her usual bright demeanor was nowhere to be found. Instead, tears streamed down her face as she prepared to reveal something so shocking, so deeply personal, that it would leave an entire nation stunned into silence. What could possibly drive a child of such privilege and protection to such a moment of raw vulnerability? What devastating truth had been hidden behind palace walls, and why was it now being brought into the harsh light of public scrutiny? This is not just another royal story. This is the account of a moment when innocence met reality, when family secrets could no longer be contained, and when one brave young princess chose truth over tradition, no matter the cost. The revelation that followed would change everything the public thought they knew about the royal family, and it all began with the courage of a child who refused to stay silent any longer. The morning started like any other at Adelaide Cottage. Princess Charlotte woke to the familiar sounds of birds chirping outside her bedroom window and the distant hum of security personnel beginning their daily routines. At 9 years old, she had grown accustomed to the careful choreography that surrounded royal life, where every movement was planned and every public appearance was rehearsed to perfection. But this particular morning felt different. There was a heaviness in the air that even Charlotte's young mind could sense. Her parents, Prince William and Catherine, had been having hushed conversations for weeks, their voices dropping to whispers whenever she or her brothers entered the room. The usual warmth in their interactions had been replaced by forced smiles and distracted glances. Charlotte had always been the most perceptive of the three Wales children. While Prince George focused on his studies and Prince Louis delighted in his games, Charlotte possessed an intuitive understanding of the adult world that often surprised those around her. She noticed when her mother's hands trembled slightly during breakfast, when her father's jaw tightened during phone calls, and when both parents seemed to be carrying an invisible weight that grew heavier with each passing day. The royal family had been preparing for what was supposed to be a routine charitable event at a children's hospital in London. Charlotte loved these visits because they gave her a chance to meet other children and share her toys and stories with those who weren't feeling well. She had spent the previous evening carefully selecting books to read aloud and small gifts to distribute, her excitement evident as she organized everything in her special royal duty bag. As the family prepared to leave for London, Charlotte overheard a heated phone conversation between her father and someone she couldn't identify. Prince William's voice carried an edge she had rarely heard before, filled with frustration and what sounded like desperation. Words like cover up, truth, and protecting the children filtered through the partially closed door of his study. Her mother found her listening and gently guided her away, but not before Charlotte caught sight of her father's expression. The strong, composed man she knew as her protector looked vulnerable and scared. It was the first time Charlotte had ever seen her father appear anything less than completely in control. During the car ride to London, the atmosphere remained tense. Catherine sat rigidly in her seat, her usual animated conversations with the children replaced by distracted nods and brief responses. Prince William stared out the window, his mind clearly elsewhere. Even their protection officers seemed more alert than usual, their eyes constantly scanning their surroundings with an intensity that made Charlotte feel uneasy. The children's hospital visit began normally enough. Charlotte brightened as she always did when meeting young patients, her natural warmth and genuine interest in others shining through. She sat with a 6-year-old boy recovering from surgery, reading him his favorite story and listening intently as he explained his collection of toy cars. For a brief moment, the troubles that had been plaguing her family seemed to fade into the background. But, as they moved through the hospital corridors, Charlotte began to notice adults behaving strangely around her family. Nurses and doctors who usually greeted them with professional warmth now exchanged meaningful glances when they thought no one was looking. Hospital administrators huddled in small groups, their conversations stopping abruptly whenever the royal party approached. The turning point came when they reached the hospital's main conference room for a planned meeting with senior staff and some of the patients' families. What was supposed to be a routine discussion about the hospital's programs and future needs quickly took an unexpected turn when one of the doctors, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, approached Prince William with obvious urgency. Charlotte watched as Dr. Mitchell spoke quietly to her father, her expression grave and concerned. Whatever she was saying caused Prince William's complexion to pale visibly. Catherine, who had been chatting with a group of nurses nearby, immediately sensed something was wrong and moved to her husband's side. The conversation between the adults grew more intense, though they attempted to keep their voices low. Charlotte, standing with her brothers near a display of children's artwork, found herself drawn toward her parents despite the protection officer's attempts to keep the children occupied with other activities. It was then that Charlotte heard the words that would change everything. Dr. Mitchell, clearly unaware that the young princess was within earshot, spoke about medical records, genetic testing, and family history that doesn't match. The doctor's words were fragmented and medical in nature, but Charlotte understood enough to realize that something very serious was being discussed about someone in her family. Prince William's response was swift and firm, but Charlotte caught the desperation in his voice as he said, "This cannot become public. The children don't know, and we need time to figure out how to handle this." His words carried the weight of a man trying to protect his family from something that felt inevitable and devastating. Catherine placed a protective hand on her husband's arm, her own voice barely above a whisper as she replied, "But if it's true, William, we can't hide it forever. Someone will find out, and then it will be even worse." The fear in her mother's voice sent a chill through Charlotte that she had never experienced before. The adults continued their urgent discussion, unaware that Charlotte was absorbing every word and trying to piece together a puzzle that seemed to involve her family's most private matters. The medical terminology was confusing, but the emotional undertones were crystal clear. Something significant had been discovered, something that could potentially expose a long-held secret. As the hospital visit continued, Charlotte found it increasingly difficult to concentrate on the activities and conversations around her. Her mind raced with questions about what she had overheard. Why were her parents so frightened? What kind of secret could be so terrible that it would require such careful protection? And why did she have the growing feeling that whatever was happening would somehow involve her directly? The ride home was even more tense than the journey to the hospital had been. Charlotte sat quietly, observing her parents' continued worried exchanges and the way they kept glancing at their children as if seeing them differently than before. The protective bubble that had always surrounded the Wales children seemed to have developed cracks, and Charlotte could sense that their carefully constructed world was about to change in ways none of them could fully prepare for. That evening, after her brothers had gone to bed, Charlotte made a decision that would prove to be the catalyst for everything that followed. Instead of staying in her room as instructed, she crept down the hallway toward her parents' study, where she could hear them engaged in another intense discussion. The conversation she overheard that night would provide the missing pieces of the puzzle and set in motion events that would ultimately lead to her emotional revelation before a stunned nation. The truth she discovered was more complex and far-reaching than anything her young mind could have imagined, and it would require a courage she didn't yet know she possessed to bring it into the light. Hidden in the shadows outside her parents' study, Charlotte pressed herself against the wall, her heart beating so loudly she worried they might hear it through the heavy wooden door. The conversation inside was more heated than any she had ever witnessed between her parents, and the words she was hearing painted a picture that challenged everything she thought she knew about her family. "The DNA results are conclusive, William," Catherine's voice carried a mixture of sadness and resignation. "Charlotte isn't genetically yours. The tests Dr. Mitchell ran as part of the children's medical screening for the charity work revealed discrepancies that can't be ignored anymore." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Charlotte felt the world shift beneath her feet as she processed words that didn't seem to make sense. What did it mean that she wasn't genetically her father's? Prince William had been her papa since the day she was born. He had taught her to ride bikes, helped her with homework, and tucked her in every night with stories about brave princesses and kind dragons. Prince William's response came in a voice Charlotte barely recognized, thick with emotion and confusion. "But how is that possible, Catherine? We've been together since university. I was there for every moment of your pregnancy, every doctor's appointment. I held her the moment she was born." Catherine's sob was audible through the door, and Charlotte felt tears begin to form in her own eyes, though she didn't fully understand why. There was that conference in Edinburgh, Catherine whispered. Remember? When I was having problems with morning sickness early in the pregnancy, and you had to stay in London for that emergency Commonwealth meeting. I was so lonely and scared, and Dr. James Thornfield was there presenting his research on prenatal care. The name meant nothing to Charlotte, but the way her mother spoke it carried weight and guilt that even a 9-year-old could recognize. Dr. James Thornfield was apparently someone who had been significant in ways that were only now coming to light. The conference where you met that physician who was doing research on royal medical histories? Prince William's voice was carefully controlled, but Charlotte could hear the pain underneath. Catherine, please tell me you didn't. I never meant for it to happen, Catherine interrupted, her voice breaking completely now. I was emotional, hormonal, and terrified about the pregnancy. You were so busy with royal duties, and I felt so alone. Dr. Thornfield was kind and understanding, and he seemed to care about what I was going through in a way that felt personal rather than professional. Charlotte didn't understand all the implications of what she was hearing, but she grasped that her mother had done something during her pregnancy that had resulted in Charlotte not being Prince William's biological daughter. The complexity of adult relationships was beyond her comprehension, but the emotional devastation in both her parents' voices was unmistakably clear. Does he know? Prince William asked, and Charlotte could hear him moving around the room, probably pacing as he did when he was deeply troubled. Does Dr. Thornfield know that Charlotte might be his daughter? I never told him, Catherine replied. I convinced myself that it was impossible, that the timing didn't work out, that Charlotte was definitely yours. I wanted so desperately for it to be true that I made myself believe it was. But, seeing the test results today, seeing how her genetic markers don't match yours at all but do show characteristics that could align with James's background. The conversation paused, and Charlotte heard her father pour himself a drink, something he rarely did outside of formal occasions. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weariness that made him sound much older than his years. What does this mean for us, Catherine? What does this mean for Charlotte, for the boys, for the monarchy? If this comes out publicly, it won't just affect our family. It could destabilize everything. Charlotte pressed herself closer to the door, desperate to hear her mother's response. The idea that her very existence could somehow threaten the monarchy was terrifying and confusing. She had always been taught that being royal was about service and duty, but now it seemed her presence might be causing problems she never could have imagined. I don't know, Catherine admitted. I'd been carrying this secret for nearly 10 years, hoping it would never matter, hoping the truth would never come out. But Dr. Mitchell's screening was so thorough, and the genetic inconsistencies are too significant to ignore or explain away. We need to tell Charlotte, Prince William said after another long pause. She deserves to know the truth, especially if there's any chance this could become public knowledge. She needs to hear it from us, not discover it through media speculation or palace gossip. She's only 9 years old, William. How do we explain something this complex to a child? How do we tell her that the father she adores might not be her biological parent, but that it doesn't change how much you love her? Charlotte felt tears streaming down her face as she realized the full weight of what her parents were discussing. The man she had always called Papa, the person she admired most in the world, might not actually be her real father. But even more confusing was the obvious love and concern in his voice as he discussed how to protect her from this revelation. We tell her the truth in terms she can understand, Prince William replied, his voice growing stronger and more determined. We explain that families are built on love, not just biology. We make sure she knows that nothing about how I feel about her will ever change, regardless of what any test says. But what about Dr. Thornfield? What if he finds out and wants to be part of her life? What if he demands custody rights or goes to the media? This could become an international scandal that destroys everything we've worked to build for our family and for the monarchy. The possibility that there might be another man out there who could claim to be her real father added another layer of confusion to Charlotte's already overwhelming emotional state. She had never considered that there might be adults in the world who had connections to her that she didn't know about. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Prince William said. Right now, our priority has to be Charlotte's well-being and making sure she feels secure and loved regardless of what these tests reveal. Everything else is secondary to that." Charlotte heard movement in the room and realized her parents were preparing to end their conversation. She quickly and quietly made her way back to her bedroom, her mind racing with everything she had learned. Sleep was impossible as she lay in bed trying to process the idea that her entire understanding of her family might be based on something that wasn't completely true. Over the following days, Charlotte found herself studying her parents' faces and interactions with new intensity. She looked for signs that Prince William might treat her differently now that he knew she might not be his biological daughter, but his behavior toward her remained as loving and attentive as ever. If anything, he seemed to be making extra efforts to spend time with her and show her affection. Catherine, however, was clearly struggling with the weight of her secret and its recent revelation. Charlotte noticed her mother watching her with expressions that seemed to combine love, guilt, and worry in ways that made the young princess feel responsible for emotions she didn't fully understand. The most difficult part was pretending she didn't know anything was wrong. Charlotte had to continue participating in family activities, attending royal engagements, and interacting with her brothers as if her world hadn't been completely turned upside down. The effort of maintaining normalcy while processing such life-changing information began to take its toll on her usually cheerful demeanor. It was during a routine visit to a local school, where Charlotte was supposed to participate in a reading program with younger children, that the emotional pressure finally became too much to contain. As she sat with a group of 5- and 6-year-olds, listening to them talk excitedly about their families and their parents, Charlotte felt the weight of her secret knowledge become unbearable. One little girl, Emma, proudly showed Charlotte a drawing she had made of her family, pointing out her mother, father, and baby brother with obvious joy and security. "My daddy reads to me every night," Emma said with complete confidence in the stability of her family unit. "He says I'm his special princess and that nothing will ever change how much he loves me." The innocent words hit Charlotte like a physical blow, bringing her face to face with questions about her own identity and place in her family that she was too young to fully process. The tears that had been building for days finally began to flow, and, despite her attempts to compose herself, Charlotte found herself sobbing in front of the bewildered children and concerned teachers. It was this moment of breakdown that would eventually lead to the public revelation that stunned the nation, as Charlotte realized she could no longer carry the burden of her family's secret alone. The breakdown at the school marked a turning point that Charlotte's parents could no longer ignore. When they arrived to collect their distraught daughter, finding her being comforted by concerned teachers who couldn't understand what had triggered such an emotional response, Prince William and Catherine realized that their careful attempts to manage the situation had failed. Charlotte's sobs intensified when she saw her parents, and, for the first time since overhearing their conversation, she couldn't maintain the pretense that everything was normal. "I know," she whispered through her tears as Catherine knelt beside her. "I know about the tests and Dr. Thornfield and everything you've been talking about." The admission hung in the air like a confession, and Charlotte watched as her parents' carefully constructed facade crumbled. Catherine's face went pale with the realization that their most private family crisis had been witnessed by their young daughter, while Prince William's expression shifted from concern to a protective determination that Charlotte had never seen before. "How long have you known?" Prince William asked gently, sitting down so he could be at Charlotte's eye level. His voice carried no anger or disappointment, only love and concern for what she must have been going through. "Since the hospital visit," Charlotte replied, her voice still shaky with emotion. "I heard you talking with the doctor, and then I listened outside your study that night. I didn't mean to spy, but I was scared because everyone was acting so strange, and I wanted to understand what was happening." Catherine pulled Charlotte into her arms, holding her tightly as if she could somehow shield her daughter from the complexity of the adult world that had invaded their family. "Oh, sweetheart, you shouldn't have had to carry this burden alone. We were trying to figure out how to tell you in the right way, but you've been dealing with this knowledge all by yourself." "Am I really not Papa's daughter?" Charlotte asked, the question that had been haunting her for days finally voiced aloud. The vulnerability in her voice broke Prince William's heart, and he immediately moved to embrace both his wife and the little girl who, regardless of biology, was absolutely his daughter in every way that mattered. "Charlotte, listen to me very carefully," Prince William said, his voice steady and filled with conviction. "You are my daughter. You have been my daughter from the moment you were born, and you will always be my daughter, no matter what any test says. Being a father isn't just about biology. It's about love, and protection, and being there for every important moment. I have been your papa for 9 years, and I will be your papa for the rest of my life. The sincerity in his voice began to ease some of Charlotte's fears, but she still had questions that her young mind struggled to articulate. But if there's another man who might be my real father, does that mean I don't really belong in our family? Does that mean I'm not really a princess? Catherine's tears flowed freely now as she realized how profoundly this revelation had shaken her daughter's sense of identity and belonging. You belong with us, she said firmly. You are our daughter, our princess, and nothing will ever change that. I made a mistake a long time ago, but that mistake doesn't define you or change how much you are loved. The family spent the next several hours in deep conversation, with Prince William and Catherine working to address Charlotte's fears and questions in age-appropriate ways. They explained that families come in many different forms, that love is what creates true family bonds, and that Charlotte's place in their lives was secure regardless of any genetic revelations. But Charlotte, with the perceptiveness that had always marked her character, understood that the situation was more complex than her parents were letting on. What happens if people find out? She asked. What happens if this secret gets out and everyone knows? Prince William and Catherine exchanged glances, knowing that their daughter had identified the very concern that had been keeping them awake at night. The royal family operated under constant public scrutiny, and any revelation about Charlotte's parentage could create a media firestorm that would be impossible to control. We'll face whatever comes together, Prince William said. Our job is to protect our family and make sure you feel safe and loved, no matter what happens. Charlotte spent the next few weeks trying to return to normal routines while processing her new understanding of her family situation. Her parents made extra efforts to include her in conversations about royal duties and future plans, subtly reinforcing her place in the family structure. However, the weight of carrying such a significant secret continued to affect her emotional well-being. The situation reached a crisis point during what was supposed to be a routine visit to a children's charity event in Manchester. Charlotte had been looking forward to the visit, which involved meeting with young people who had overcome significant challenges in their own lives. The theme of the event was truth and courage, focusing on the importance of honesty and bravery in facing difficult circumstances. As Charlotte listened to the young people share their stories of overcoming adversity through honesty and courage, she found herself deeply moved by their examples. A teenage boy spoke about finding the strength to reveal his struggles with anxiety, despite fears about how others would judge him. A young girl discussed the relief she felt after finally telling her teachers about problems at home that she had been hiding for months. Each story resonated with Charlotte's own experience of carrying a heavy secret that affected not just her but her entire family. The speakers talked about how keeping secrets had made their problems worse, and how finding the courage to speak the truth had ultimately led to help and healing. It was during this event, surrounded by examples of young people who had found strength through honesty, that Charlotte made a decision that would change everything. As the afternoon concluded and the family prepared to leave, Charlotte surprised everyone by asking if she could address the gathered crowd. Prince William and Catherine looked at each other with concern, unsure of what their daughter intended to say but recognizing the determination in her expression. After a brief discussion, they agreed to let her speak, trusting in her judgment while preparing themselves for whatever she might reveal. Charlotte stood before the microphone, her small frame somehow commanding the attention of the entire room. The audience, which included local dignitaries, charity workers, media representatives, and the young people who had been sharing their stories, fell silent as they waited to hear what the young princess wanted to say. My name is Princess Charlotte, she began, her voice stronger than anyone expected from a 9-year-old in such a situation. I'm here today because I've learned something important from all of you about telling the truth, even when it's scary. Catherine and Prince William stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene or trust their daughter to handle whatever she was about to reveal. The media representatives in the room sensed that something significant was about to happen, and cameras focused intently on the young princess. Sometimes families have secrets that feel too big and too scary to talk about, Charlotte continued, her voice beginning to waver slightly but her resolve remaining firm. My family has been carrying a secret like that, and I've learned that keeping it inside just makes everything harder. The room remained completely silent as Charlotte paused, gathering the courage to continue. Prince William stepped closer to the microphone, ready to support his daughter or intervene if necessary, but Charlotte looked up at him with eyes that showed both fear and determination. "I found out that the man I call Papa might not be my biological father," Charlotte said, her words causing a collective gasp from the audience. "But what I've learned is that being a real father isn't about biology. It's about love and protection and being there for your children no matter what." Tears began streaming down Charlotte's face as she continued, but her voice remained steady. "Prince William has been my papa since the day I was born. He has loved me and protected me and made me feel safe every single day of my life. Some tests might say we don't share the same genetics, but that doesn't change anything about who we are as a family." The emotional impact of Charlotte's words was immediately evident throughout the room. Many of the adults were openly crying, moved by the courage and maturity of the young princess who had chosen to address one of the most difficult situations a child could face in such a public and honest way. "I wanted to tell you this because all of you taught me today that keeping secrets doesn't protect people the way we think it does," Charlotte concluded. "My mama made a mistake a long time ago, but that mistake doesn't define our family. What defines us is how much we love each other and how we face difficult things together." Prince William immediately moved to embrace Charlotte as she stepped away from the microphone, his own tears evident as he held his daughter close. Catherine joined them, and the three stood together as the room erupted in supportive applause from an audience that had just witnessed something unprecedented in royal history. The revelation sent shockwaves through the media and the public, but the response was overwhelmingly supportive of Charlotte's courage and the family's honesty. Charlotte's decision to speak the truth publicly transformed what could have been a devastating scandal into a powerful example of family resilience and the triumph of love over biology. Her courage in facing the truth and sharing it with the world earned her respect not just as a princess, but as a young person who had learned to choose honesty and authenticity over the safety of secrets. The experience strengthened the bonds within the Wales family and demonstrated that even royal families face complex challenges that require courage, honesty, and love to overcome. Charlotte's tears that day in Manchester weren't just tears of sadness or fear, but tears of relief at finally being free from the burden of carrying such a heavy secret alone.